Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a very, very warm welcome to this evening's lecture. My name's Trevor Pritchard. I'm on the committee of the Solent branch of the Royal Aeronautical Society, and it's our great pleasure this evening to host this presentation by Chris Brady. Chris started flying in 1985 with the Royal Air Force while studying for his physics degree. He spent several years in general aviation as a flying instructor, examiner, C of A test pilot for all Group A and B types, and chief pilot of an air taxi company. In 1994, he joined British Midland Airways as a first officer on the 737 3-4-500 series based at Heathrow, and within 2 years was captain and then a line training captain. He taught performance, technical refreshers, and various other ground school subjects. In 2001, he joined EasyJet, where he was the EasyJet 737 fleet manager from 2005 till 2010, and their senior investigator from 2010 to 2016. He was the EasyJet representative on the UK Flight Safety Committee from 2005 and chairman of the UK Flight Safety Committee from 2014 to 2016. In his 18 years on the 737, he's accumulated over 10,000 flying hours on most versions. He's conducted over 150 post-maintenance check flights and customer demonstration flights on 737 Classics and NGs. He's also been flying the Airbus A320, both the current engine and new engine option family, since 2011. He's the author of the Boeing 737 technical site, established in 1999, and the Boeing 737 technical guide, first published in 2006 and updated annually. He has been cited in the US House Committee report on the design, development, and certification of the Boeing 737 MAX, and has appeared in and advised on dozens of news reports and documentaries about the 737 MAX. So it's a great delight and a pleasure. We're really privileged to have somebody who's truly a world expert on this aircraft, and he's going to give us a short history of the 737 MAX and the maneuvering characteristics augmentation system from development to fix. I think we've got close to 300 attendees online, or maybe more. So it's a great audience we've got this evening, and it's a real pleasure now to hand over to Chris. Thank you very much.
Hi Trevor, thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you all tonight. This is a subject that really could fill a day, if not a week. So I've tried to condense it down as much as I can. The presentation is actually only about 22 slides. And I'm also aware that, of course, many of you are not 737 pilots or engineers, so I've tried to keep it general, but going into detail where necessary. Hopefully there's something in this for everyone, and it's hopefully a fair representation of how the MAX came about, how MCAS came about, and what unfolded over the last few years. Thank you.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Brady, and I'm the author of the Boeing 737 Tech Guide and the Boeing 737 Tech Site. I'm going to talk to you this evening about the history of the Boeing 737 MAX, and in particular its MCAS system. To understand how MCAS came about, we need to understand how the MAX came about. The backdrop of the MAX was that sales of the NG, the so-called next generation, the actual generation prior to the MAX, were very strong. At the time of MAX launch, the order backlog was in excess of 3,500 airframes. That was enough to keep production running for at least 5 years. So there was no need on Boeing's part to produce a successor. And whenever Boeing approached the airlines asking them what they wanted from a successor, all they said was they wanted another 737. Because for airlines, you have to understand that there are quite a lot of economies for keeping a single type fleet, or keeping a continued type rating. both for aircrew and for engineers. Boeing did look at 737 replacement aircraft. The Yellowstone 1, or new small aircraft, were various project names for it. They've been looking at this for 10-15 years. Development costs of that were estimated to be around about $10 billion US. But significantly, the 737 replacement, whatever it was to be, would have had little economic improvement over the NG. So all in all, there was very little appetite for a replacement or a successor to the 737 NG. So what happened? Why did the MAX come about? Well, the answer actually wasn't from Boeing or from the airlines. It was from CFM. In 2008, they announced the LEAP engine, which was at a stroke going to offer a 20% fuel efficiency over the CFM 56. Now this got everybody interested. The airlines wanted it, and Boeing had to deliver it. However, the A320 family also used the CFM 56 and therefore would also use the LEAP engine. Now the A320, I say the A320, I include the 318, 19, 20 and 21. The A320 family, it is a physically taller, larger aircraft than the 737. That actually goes back to when the A320 was first designed. It was built with the CFM 56 engine, which is a high bypass engine. The original 737 was built with a JT8, which had very, very little bypass. So the 737 sits lower to the ground than the A320 for historic reasons. This gave Airbus the advantage. The A320 family could accept the full diameter LEAP engine without any significant redesign. And I say the full diameter because you see down in the bottom right there, I've quoted the fan diameter of the LEAP 1A, the Airbus version, of 198 centimeters, giving it a bypass ratio of 11:1. The largest version that Boeing could accept had 176 centimeter diameter. So that's 22 centimeters less diameter, thereby reducing the bypass ratio on the 737 version to either 9:1. So again, there was a loss of economy there. Secondly, Airbus kept the flight deck and any other changes to a minimum for expediency. If you look inside the flight deck of the Neo, it is identical to the CEO, the conventional engine option. There were no changes made other than the engine, whereas on the MAX there were many changes. The flight deck is significantly different in the MAX to the NG, and there were various other airframe improvements as well. Most obvious one being that the tail cone is now conical instead of the old bulbous version, for drag savings. All of this meant that Airbus were able to launch and therefore take orders 18 months before Boeing. So you see from this that Boeing were immediately on the back foot. This was the first time that the two manufacturers had ever launched a new version of their narrow-body aircraft at the same time. Normally they've been able to take their own sweet time and develop them with the time that they needed. But for the MAX, because Boeing was so on the back foot, it was, well, I hesitate to say the word rushed, but they were always conscious of the competition from the Neo. And all the time that passed meant that the Neo was taking orders that the MAX was not able to take. So, how did MCAS come about? Okay, so soon after launch in 2012, Wind tunnel data simulating high-speed wind-up turns showed that the aerodynamic interaction between the larger LEAP engine cells and the wing created a non-compliant pitch-up. Okay, so in this case the nacelles were acting as wings in themselves, creating lift. The pitch-up is non-compliant. How do you fix it? Well, Boeing actually looked at many aerodynamic ways to fix this. They looked at revising the wing vortex generator pattern. They looked at changing the leading edge stall strip or adding one. They looked at revising the leading edge vortilon patterns, but none of these were successful. So in the end, what they did was they borrowed a system called MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System, that they'd fitted to the KC-46A, which you probably better know as the 767 tanker. Now, a couple of things to note about this. The first is that it was an absolutely sound, safe design on the 767, and that it was only designed to operate at, and I quote from the graphic on the right there, at extreme high-speed pitch-up conditions that are outside the normal operating envelope. Okay, so what changed? In March 2016, this is a couple of months after the first flight of the MAX, flight testing discovered that the low-speed 1G handling was non-compliant against actually various CFRs, but most particularly 25203, which is stall characteristics. And what they found was that as you approach the stall, the stick force gradient on the control column was actually reversing. The midsection of the wing was creating lift for longer than expected because of the interaction with the nacelle and the wing. So it was holding on to the lift for longer, and when it did break, when the stall did break, it fell away quite dramatically. So the scope of MCAS was extended to low speed, and the logic was changed. Unfortunately, the system safety assessment was not updated, the FAA weren't informed, and MCAS was not documented in the FCOMs or indeed anywhere. So let's take a closer look at these MCAS design flaws. And it's the revised version of MCAS. The original version was fine, but the changes they made were the following. First of all, the activation trigger was from a single angle of attack source. Previously, it had been from an angle of attack source and an accelerometer, because G had been the trigger as well. Secondly, they changed MCAS on the 737 at the low speed end to continue to cycle, that's 10 seconds on and 5 seconds off, for as long as the condition existed. The 767 version and the original high-speed version was just one cycle. Thirdly, they had to increase the stabilizer authority of MCAS because they were dealing with a low-speed regime rather than a high-speed regime. And they allowed MCAS to apply more stabilizer than can be counteracted with elevator. Fourthly, the MCAS movement of the stabilizer could not be stopped with opposite control column movement. Now it could on the 767, could not on the 737. And finally, there was no dedicated failure warning light or QRH procedure for misbehaving MCAS. Boeing did actually look, and it's a matter of public record now, that there was an idea to make an MCAS warning light on the flight controls panel, but for reasons which we'll come on to, that idea was rejected. Let's take a closer look at that single angle of attack issue. Here's what I was asked about it almost 2 years ago now by BBC Panorama.
If you look in a flight deck, there's actually two of everything. And there's two of everything for a damn good reason. That if one fails, you've got another one. For a system which can have such a dramatic, significant and catastrophic effect on the aircraft, to take its input from one source runs contrary to everything in aircraft design. And I am staggered that Boeing designed it that way.
What I was also going on to say, there was a stagger that Boeing designed it that way and that the FAA certified it that way. Again, we'll come on to those issues. So let's take a closer look at this angle of attack sensor issue. The 737 has got two angle of attack sensors, one on each side of the nose cone. But MCAS activation was only triggered by a single sensor. That's because the MCAS is a sub-function of the flight control computer, and only one flight control computer is active on any given flight. The flight control computer in use flip-flops between flight, so on the first flight of the day it'll be FCC1, second flight of the day FCC2, and FCC1, the MCAS feed into it will feed from the captain's angle of attack sensor. When FCC2 is in use, MCAS takes the feed from the first officer's angle of attack sensor. Now the second point is that angle of attack sensors of all aircraft types are known to fail and can provide null or erroneous data. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a weighted weather vane. It's mechanical with resolvers inside it. The movement of the vane can stick. It can stick because of dirt or debris or other items in there. And if you recall on the A320, the accident in Perpignan, the air test accident, was due to icing of the alpha vane. In my 18 years flying the 737, I had two angle of attack vane failures. So it's a known issue. Boeing engineers and an authorised representative, now an authorised representative, or AR as they're known, these are Boeing employees that are supposed to report to the FAA and be the FAA's eyes and ears. They raised concerns about MCAS relying on a single angle of attack sensor as early as 2015, and the impact to MCAS from erroneous angle of attack data and a pilot's ability to counteract repetitive MCAS activation in 2016. These concerns were not investigated thoroughly enough, and in some cases they were dismissed by other Boeing colleagues. Next, Boeing discovered in August 2017 that an angle of attack disagree alert was inoperative on 80% of its aircraft. Boeing chose to conceal this fact from the FAA, affected customers and MAX pilots until after the Lion Air crash. Most astoundingly, Boeing continued to manufacture and deliver scores of MAX aircraft with non-functioning angle of attack disagree alerts. So the angle of attack disagree alert was standard on the NG, and it was supposed to be standard on the MAX, but there was an optional angle of attack indicator display on the PFD, on the primary flight display. And due to a programming error, the angle of attack disagree alert was deactivated if customers hadn't paid for the optional angle of attack display. Now, Boeing discovered this in 2017, a year or so before the first accident, but did not get this fixed. And this could have been critical in the diagnosis of the problem on the accident flights. So let's look at the accident flights. The first one actually started the day before the accident flight. A refurbished angle of attack probe was miscalibrated 21 degrees too high, and it was installed on the Lion Air MAX. The aircraft got airborne. The crew got a stick shaker immediately after takeoff. They got indications of an airspeed disagree, and MCAS activated. Fortunately, there was a pilot on the jump seat. He assisted, and he advised the crew to switch off the stabilizer trim cutout switches, which would deactivate MCAS. Now, none of the pilots knew what MCAS was, but the guy on the jump seat had the capacity to see the stabilizer trim moving uncommandedly, and he directed the crew to switch off the stabilizer trim cutout switches. That aircraft landed safely. A tech log entry was made as follows, and this is a quote from the report: ISNL disagree shown after takeoff, and field differential pressure light illuminated. Because that's all the guys knew had happened. They were the indications in the flight deck. Overnight, the engineers worked on that tech log entry, and no faults were found. The aircraft took off again with a new crew. The same sequence of events happened, but there was no jump seat occupant. That aircraft crashed into the sea at high speed 12 minutes after takeoff. Let's look at Boeing's response to this accident. Boeing issued an FCOM bulletin to emphasize the procedures provided in the runaway stabilizer non-normal checklist. The condition for the runaway stabilizer is given as uncommanded stabilizer trim movement occurs continuously. Now, I would suggest to you that what the guys got was not a continuous movement of uncommanded stabilizer trim. What they got was up to 10 seconds of stabilizer trim movement followed by 5 seconds off, because that's the programmed logic of MCAS at the time. It was 10 seconds on, 5 seconds off. Furthermore, if you interrupted the 10 seconds on with electric pitch trim, it would stop. So you would think that you had solved the problem by applying electric pitch trim in the opposite direction. What would happen is, once you'd applied the electric pitch trim, behind the scenes MCAS would count to 5 and then start again. So the notion that this is a continuous uncommanded stabilizer trim movement is false. And why is that important? Because if you look at the very title of the procedure, runaway stabilizer, if you ask any pilot to describe a runaway condition of the stabilizer or anything, it will be a continuous uncommanded movement towards the full limit, not this sporadic, intermittent application of stabilizer, which is what the crew's got. Boeing still did not mention MCAS anywhere in that bulletin or anywhere at all. The US Transport Committee's final report on the MAX accidents, which I will quote several times in this presentation, states that the collective responses of the FAA and Boeing in this critical time period between crashes were woefully inadequate and appeared predisposed to blame the pilots. I was asked, as have many people been asked, about the actions of the flight crew. Were they good enough? And here's my response.
Boeing have suggested that they didn't follow the right procedure. Is that fair?
It is unfair. It's absolutely unfair. If you're going to design and certify an airliner with such a complicated, obscure failure mode as happened to that crew, it's no wonder that your average crew aren't able to deal with it.
So let's look more closely at this issue of should the crew have done better. Let's have a look at what they got in the flight deck. Multiple oral and visual warnings. The stick shaker sounded the instant there was weight off wheels. So as soon as the aircraft got airborne, the stick shaker started, and it continued all the way until impact. The stick shaker is noisy. The stick shaker vibrates the control column. It is a hell of a distraction. There was a difference between the left and right hand flight director pitch bars. Those on the left were saying pitch down because the left alpha vane thought the angle of attack was too high. And the PLIs, the pitch limit indicators, were also pitching down. The crew got IIS disagree, alt disagree alerts, and also field differential pressure caution. This is because the angle of attack feeds into the air data computer, which generates the speed and altitude you see on the PFD. GPWS don't sink and pull up. MCAS comes alive after flap retraction, which is commenced at 1,000 feet above ground level typically. Once the flaps were retracted, which would have been say 1,500 feet, the MCAS will have pitched the aircraft down, and that will have given both don't sink and pull up warnings. They are attention getters. As the flight progressed, the airspeed increased and increased because they were at takeoff power, or actually back at climb power, and the aircraft had been pitching down on numerous occasions, and that combination obviously would give you a very high airspeed, and the overspeed clacker would be sounding. There was a missing angle of attack disagree alert, as discussed on the previous slide, but the most immediate and apparent issue was the airspeed disagree. That's what the crew will have seen and diagnosed first. That's what they were according to the reports which were out. So after flap retraction, you get the nose down stabilizer trim for 10 seconds on, 5 seconds off, paused with 5 seconds with the use of electric pitch trim. And that happened multiple occasions before impact on both flights. I think it was 12 on one flight and 20 on the other. Multiple occasions. There was no QRH procedure for this scenario. Boeing did not publish one. There's no ICAS on the 737, or ECAM if you're an Airbus pilot. So the 737 will show warnings like the field differential pressure one on the right hand side of the screen there, and it will bring up a master caution system, and from there you then look in the QRH for the appropriate caution and action that procedure. There's been a lot made since these accidents that ICAS would have detected, for instance, the angle of attack disagree, and would have got down to the root cause of the problem. How true that is or not, we can only hypothesize. But certainly there were, without doubt, multiple warnings going on, and ICAS could have prioritised those. And finally, there was no knowledge, by that I mean documentation or training of MCAS. No crew in the world knew of MCAS other than a select few Boeing test pilots. So they were dealing with the unknown. So should the crew have done better? Personally, I don't think they can have done. They could have done better. Let's look at the second accident. Ethiopia, 10th of March 2019. The angle of attack sensor failed on takeoff at a little over 74 degrees. Again, the crew got the stick shaker, airspeed disagree, MCAS activation, etc. In this case, the crew, after 5 minutes, perhaps with the benefit of the knowledge in the bulletin, elected to switch off the stabilizer trim cutout switches. But unfortunately, having done so, they were then unable to move the manual trim wheel because of the high aerodynamic loads. The CVR heard the FO say he was unable to move the trim wheel. Now, at this time, the aircraft was well over VMO, so the aerodynamic loads were very high. But the control column forces were also very high. So the captain directed the FO to re-engage the stab trim cutout switches because the manual trim wasn't working and he needed to be able to electrically trim off the back pressure. The FO did that and the aircraft crashed a minute later with over 180 pounds of backstick force applied at well, you can see there at 500 knots, 33,000 feet per minute. All 346 people on the 2 accident flights perished. So, the consequences. 346 deaths. The MAX was grounded for between 20 and 22 months. It was 20 months for the FAA, 21 for Transport Canada and 22 for EASA. From the 13th of March 2019, during which time more issues were discovered. These were things like the capability of the flight control computers, wiring runs down to the stabilizer, debris found in the fuel tanks from production, various things. The whole episode is believed to have cost Boeing over $23 billion in direct costs alone, plus around 1,200 cancelled orders. Now the list price for each aircraft is, assuming about $100 to $120 million depending on the type. That gives you the 144. If Boeing's profit was, I don't know, 10% of that, there's another $14 billion. So this is already 2 to 3 times more expensive than having designed a whole new aircraft. Finally, there was worldwide loss of confidence in the MAX brand, Boeing, the FAA, and the regulatory system. I mean, these events did untold damage. However, this is in the process of being fixed and changed. Let's have a look at Boeing's concealment of MCAS. This is an internal document from Boeing dated May 2013, which was made public in the House final report. And it discusses deletion of MCAS nomenclature. Recommended action: investigate deletion of MCAS nomenclature and cover under the umbrella of revised speed trim. And in the minutes, if we emphasise MCAS as a new function, there may be a greater certification and training impact. So treat as an addition to speed trim. Externally, it would be communicated as an addition to speed trim. Internally, we continue using the acronym MCAS. The extent of this concealment was actually fairly wide-ranging. Boeing concealed internal test data from 2012, so this is back in the ECAB simulator, that revealed it took a Boeing test pilot more than 10 seconds to diagnose and respond to an uncommanded MCAS activation, a condition which the pilot found to be catastrophic. Federal guidelines assume the pilots will respond to this condition within 4 seconds. If that fact had been declared, more safeguards would have had to have been built in. It wasn't, so they weren't. In 2013, a Boeing authorised representative approved Boeing's actions to describe MCAS externally as an addition to the speed trim system, as opposed to a new function, due to Boeing's fears that if we emphasise MCAS as a new function, there may be greater certification and training impact. So that's the slide I showed you previously. Boeing concealed the existence of MCAS from the airlines, pilots and the FAA, and omitted a description of MCAS from FCOMS, QRH, maintenance manual and training material. And immediately following the Lion Air crash, both Boeing and the FAA failed to alert the MAX pilots of the very existence of MCAS. The FAA even removed reference to MCAS from its draft emergency AD. Now, all 4 of these bullets are not my words. They are all quotes verbatim from the final committee report, which again I will show you later. So why conceal MCAS? Well, as we've already mentioned, Boeing failed to classify MCAS as a safety critical system because it would have attracted greater FAA scrutiny during the certification process. Well, what's the problem with that? Cost, of course. But not just the direct cost of building safety, whatever safety, enhanced safety systems will be required. Again, remember back to the competition element with Airbus. The MAX was 18 months behind the Neo. It was losing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of orders to its competition. For Boeing to redesign MCAS or put in the necessary safeguards, well, as we've already seen how it played out once the aircraft was grounded, it took over 20 months to unground the aircraft. So this is obviously what Boeing were concerned about, that to redesign the MAX to FAA's satisfaction would have taken a significant amount of time, during which time it would have lost many, many orders to Boeing. A further view on this is that guaranteeing that the MAX didn't require simulator training for pilots transitioning from the 73NG to the MAX was a key Boeing objective of the 737 MAX program. This was due to both costs and a lack of simulators. As of January 2020, only 34 full-motion MAX simulators existed worldwide. Estimated cost savings for that, $243 million US. And that figure is actually derived from a recent settlement that Boeing made with the US Department of Justice. To give you an example of these figures, Boeing promised Southwest Airlines a $1 million per tail rebate if simulator training was required. So you can see the stakes. So, in the 20 months or so that the aircraft's been grounded, let's have a look at the fix. All of the design flaws, see an earlier slide, have been rectified. No less than 8 QRH procedures have been revised. Aircraft flight manual limitations are being added. 10 MMEL restrictions have been added. The angle of attack disagree alert must be standard on all aircraft and include a free option to have the angle of attack display. An explanation of MCAS must be added to the FCOM. Pilot type conversion training is to cover speed trim and MCAS, and this includes both CVT and flight simulator. Enhancements to be made to the maintenance documentation, the aircraft maintenance manual and the interactive fault isolation manual. A computerized third synthetic angle of attack sensor system to be added. This was something that was pushed very hard for by EASA because of course the Airbus has 3 angle of attack gauges, probes, sorry. So the Airbus uses a voting system, so if one angle of attack sensor is different to the other 2, it gets voted off. With the 737 only having 2, a voting system can't apply, but with a third sensor that could. Now Boeing aren't going to physically mount a third sensor on the aircraft, but it will come up with a synthetic angle of attack sensor, and that will be standard from the MAX 10 onwards. And finally, this is a restriction imposed by both Transport Canada and EASA to provide a mechanism for crew to inhibit an erroneous stick shaker. And that's because a single angle of attack source can trigger an erroneous stick shaker, and it could do this, in all generations of the 737. I had this myself on one of my angle of attack failure incidents. So let's just look a little more closely at that US House report I've been referring to. So this is the US House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and in September 2020 they published this very comprehensive report. And I'll give you an excerpt from the summary. It states that the MAX crashes were not the result of a singular failure, technical mistake or mismanaged event. They were the horrific culmination of a series of faulty technical assumptions by Boeing's engineers, a lack of transparency on the part of Boeing's management, and grossly insufficient oversight by the FAA. And I think that statement is absolutely fair. One other excerpt. The FAA's own draft review of MCAS in the wake of the Lion Air crash found no non-compliances with the FAA regulations on the part of Boeing. The fact that multiple technical design missteps or certification blunders were deemed compliant by the FAA points to a critical need for legislative and regulatory reforms. Producing a compliant aircraft that proved unsafe should have been an immediate wake-up call to both Boeing and the FAA that the current regulatory system that certified the MAX is broken. Unfortunately, serious questions remain as to whether Boeing and the FAA have fully and correctly learned the lessons from the MAX failures. So there we go, we have an aircraft which was compliant but unsafe. So, the bigger picture on this. The NTSB issued 7 safety recommendations to the FAA, calling upon the agency to address concerns about how multiple alerts and indications are considered when making assumptions as part of design safety assessments. The 7 recommendations issued to the FAA urge action in 3 areas to improve flight safety. First, to ensure system safety assessments for the MAX and any other transport category aircraft that used assumptions about pilot response to uncommanded flight control inputs consider the effect of alerts and indications on pilot response and address any gaps in design, procedures and/or training. Second, they develop and incorporate the use of robust tools and methods for validating assumptions about pilot response to airplane failures as part of the design certification. And finally, incorporate system diagnostic tools to improve the prioritization of and more clearly present failure indications to pilots to improve the timeliness and effectiveness of their response. And this, of course, is alluding to ICAS or ECAN. So, has this been enshrined in law? Well, sort of. In December, Congress passed the Aircraft Certification, Safety and Accountability Act to reform and strengthen the FAA's aircraft certification process. There were many provisions in this, and I'm just going to give you a few of them. Improvement of certain FAA rulemakings related to and increased oversight of the type certification process and the Organisation Development Authorization System. This basically is clamping down on Boeing's in-house self-certification of the type and the whole issue around authorised representatives. Provide new confidential reporting channels of the FAA and whistleblower protections for manufacturer employees, because people were flagging this up before the accidents and nobody was listening, or at least no action was being taken. Ensure that manufacturers will complete system safety assessments on all new and derivative aircraft designs for flight control systems that consider realistic pilot responses to flight deck alerts. This, of course, was never done, or at least the original system safety assessment on the original version of MCAS was done, but it wasn't redone for the revised version for low speed. Require the FAA to review pilot training, including manual flying skills training, and the assumptions relied upon by the FAA and manufacturers when designing an airplane, and to work with the international community to improve pilot training globally. Well, there we go. I think manual flying skills is the subject of a whole other presentation. Finally, authorise new funding for the FAA to develop or expand an FAA Centre of Excellence to address flight automation and pilot response. So there you go. Now these are, as I say, are enshrined in law, and there are many other provisions as well. So things have been done. My final thoughts on this: I have no doubt that the MAX MCAS story will be used as a case study in the mismanagement of commercial pressures for decades to come. If nothing else, it reaffirms the old adage that if you think that safety is expensive, try having an accident. Whilst this episode was the making of Boeing and the FAA, all manufacturers and regulators should be reviewing their practices and asking themselves, could this happen here? If the NTSB recommendations are adopted, then the global benefit to flight safety will be significant, and the families of 346 people deserve this. Thank you everybody for your time and attention listening to this. I'm happy to take questions.
Chris, thank you very much for that. So I'll see if I can group some of these together. The first question from Roger M. Are the handling characteristics, SOPs of the MAX significantly different to the Classic and NG?
No, they're not, and intentionally so. Boeing tried hard to make all generations of 737 handle and behave like the previous version, which isn't a bad thing, because certainly the original versions, the 1 and 200 series, are the only ones I've never flown. But I've spoken to many pilots who have, and they say they handle beautifully, arguably the best of all. Whether that was just some nostalgic view of it, I'm not sure. But certainly it's always been an objective of Boeing to have all generations of the 737 handle as near identically as is feasibly possible. And I, like many Boeing pilots, have jumped in and out of, on the same day, classics and NGs. And I dare say pilots will be doing it between the MAX and the NG, and we'll notice no significant handling differences at all.
Okay, thank you. A question from Mark, who was asking, why didn't CFD or wind tunnel testing uncover the non-compliant low-speed handling earlier?
Great question. I don't know. It didn't. It was a surprise to Boeing and all their team of engineers and aerodynamicists. But there you have it. That wind tunnel testing cannot find everything. It's a useful and important first step, But it's, you know, it's not the be all and end all, and that's why there's such an extensive flight testing program to find these little wrinkles that couldn't be found by either wind tunnel or indeed computer simulations.
Thank you. And one from Simon Whiteley. Why was the system's safety assessment not updated or caught by the FAA?
It's actually down to Boeing to update the system safety assessment, and why they didn't do it, we don't know. It's been a little bit blurred over, and that precise point didn't even come out in the extensive House committee report. All they could say was that it was not updated. Now, if you were cynical and looking for conspiracy theories, you might say it wasn't updated because they didn't want to update it because of what it might find. If you want to take things at face value, that you could just say it was overlooked. Somebody made the decision incorrectly that it did not need updating. Mm-hmm. But obviously, with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, it did, and that wasn't done. And if it had have done, that would have had to have been flagged up to the FAA. And they would have demanded a more robust safety procedures in place and backups for MCAS.
Thank you. There are two questions related to the same subject here and you talked quite a bit about the AOA sensors and the importance of that in this accident scenario. The first one from Alan Stokes: why not 3 AOA sensors with the third one used as a comparator? And then, on the same vein, Mike Broomfield from the University of Birmingham, who says that the FAA and EASA initially took slightly different paths with respect to the return to service of the 737 MAX. EASA recommending the installation of a third AOA sensor using derived AOA sensor fusion, but subsequently deferred the recommendation to future designs. So what are your views and opinions on this?
Sure. Okay. Well, first off, all Boeing airliners, this is not just 737, only have 2 angle of attack vanes. I believe all Airbus airliners, well, certainly post-dating the A300, but certainly from the 320 family on, have all got 3. Airbus, as we know, with its 3, uses a voting system, so if one's different to the other 2, that one gets voted off. But that system itself is, whilst it's very good, it isn't infallible, as the Perpignan accident showed when 2 vanes froze and the good one was voted off. Now, the question is, why doesn't Boeing now install a third angle of attack vane, having seen what just having 2 can do? Well, there are a number of reasons for this. I mean, obviously, first, Boeing would say it is no longer necessary because they've put in things like differencing and comparators between the 2. So one that is deviating significantly will be voted off. If the 2 deviate by more than 5 degrees, new MCAS will shut down. So they've taken a number of steps with the revised alpha inputs into MCAS that they say makes it unnecessary to have a third vane, and the FAA agree with them on that. However, EASA didn't buy that, and again, the cynical might say it's for a European commercial advantage that they want to insist that they're built up to the same standards as Airbus in this regard, and they're insisting on 3. So what Boeing's agreed to do is meet them halfway, and introduce synthetic angle of attack, so that there will be a third angle of attack source. That third source will be synthetic. And for those of you not familiar with this, and I really hesitate to go down this road of trying to explain it because it's indeterminately complex, but essentially the synthetic angle of attack data comes from the air data computer, the ADIRS, all of the other sensors, to generate without actually having a physical third vane hanging off the side of the aircraft, a synthetic angle of attack. and that can then be used to assist the differencing and possibly introduce a voting system as Airbus has. That will be introduced with the MAX 10, which is just announced it's going to be delayed entry into service of 2023, and once it's mature on the 10, it will be retrofitted back to the 7, 8, and 9 to all of the other MAXs.
Okay, thank you. So there's a couple of Alex Fisher has both a statement and then a sort of question. So he comments with respect to what you had said about the runaway stab, saying that to characterise that as continuous perhaps wasn't done, otherwise normal operation of STS would qualify. And then he goes on to ask, Boeing could have added detail to the STS description without mentioning MCAS by name, but they didn't, did they? Is his question.
Well, yeah, Alex is right on both of those points. But Boeing tried to describe MCAS, if you like, or refer to MCAS as an addition to speed trim. So they tried to say it's just an extension of speed trim. That, I would suggest, is inaccurate. I really don't agree with that MCAS is part of speed trim. It's as far as I can see, and many other folk with an interest in this, it's a separate discrete function that works alongside STS, feeding into the flight control computer. Now, Alex is right, and anybody who's flown a 737 will know that speed trim operates, quite a lot, especially low down near the ground, after takeoff. What you would notice most, if you are sat on the jump seat of a 737 after takeoff, is the stabilizer trim clacking away merrily, without being asked to do so by the pilots. Now that's speed trim, and I guess if you want to almost define the difference between speed trim and MCAS, is that speed trim, the clue's in the name. It uses the stabilizer to trim the aircraft. MCAS doesn't use it to trim the aircraft. MCAS is, it's used to change the control column force feel. So it's an assistance to feel, not to trim. It's two totally separate ways of using the stabilizer, and for me that's the crux of it.
Thank you. So on a slightly different vein, Zed Lee says, thanks for a great lecture. He's read the JTAR report on 737 MAX, highlighting the issue with out-of-date regulations and procedures, for example, human factor related, used in the certification of new variants of legacy aircraft. He's asking what your view is on the impact of the MAX accident on this regulatory aspect, from an operator point of view, whether newer regulations should apply to aircraft already in service.
If you were to apply current regulations to all the aircraft that are in service, all those aircraft will be grounded for years. And I'm not just talking about the 737s. I'm talking about everything. You simply can't work like that. It would be nice to, but realistically, it's impractical. And airliner designs only have a finite length anyway. They're usually retired on commercial grounds. As older generations become too expensive to operate, as technology moves on and improvements are made, so the newer aircraft take over. Arguably the 737s was a victim of its own success because it stayed in circulation, far longer than almost anything, bar the DC-3, I guess. So I think as regards applying current regulations and standards to existing airliners. If that was the question, if I understood the question correctly, I think that's a lovely ideal, a lovely goal, a utopian view perhaps, but I don't think it's practical, and I don't think it would work in practice.
Thank you. Okay, now this is a very different question, and it's quite interesting. From Zhong Nam Wang. Is it enough to fix this problem by just resorting to complicated control strategies without significant aerodynamic redesign? So he's going to the root cause here.
He is, and Boeing went for that root cause initially. They tried several aerodynamic fixes for this. Now, obviously, the limiting factor was the interaction between the larger LEAP engine that was, as we know, it was physically larger, it was mounted further forward, it was inclined slightly up, and that interaction with the midsection of the wing meant that the midsection kept on flying for longer. And when the stall did break, it broke fairly dramatically. It wasn't actually the braking that was the problem; it was the lead up to it. As you increase the back pressure to approach the stall, the interaction between nacelle and wing meant that back pressure actually lightened, and you actually got a reversal in the gradient of stick force required to take the aircraft back into a steady stall. So aerodynamic fixes were Boeing's first point of call, really. I mean, the 737 is a very mechanical aircraft, especially compared to the fly-by-wire counterparts like the 320 family. So aerodynamics was the way they wanted to go. There are a lot of great aerodynamicists in Boeing, but they couldn't make it happen. They tried all kinds. They tried leading edge additions to the leading edge, to stall strips, leading edge vortilons, wing vortex generators, or trying to move them around. They tried it all, and they couldn't make it work. Maybe they could have done if they gave it long enough, but again, you have to remember the commercial backdrop here. The clock was ticking against Airbus, who were out of the traps 18 months ahead. And in the end, one bright engineer said, well, we had this problem on the 7.6 tanker and we fixed it with MCAS. Let's use that. Well, unfortunately, they had to change it, and it was in those changes where they kind of lost the plot of it.
Thank you. James asks how many MCAS incidents occurred in the US airlines fleets, MAX fleets, during the period it was in service, and presumably the manufacturer would have been informed of those events.
To the best of my knowledge, there were none, and I think had there been any, it would have come out in all of the subsequent investigations, and there have been many since the two fatal accidents. So I don't know 100% that is true, but I would bet my bottom dollar that if there had been any, it would have come out.
Mm. And in fact, on that note, there's a question from Graham Thomas who says, eye-opening lecture, is there any mechanism for pilots to highlight, notify unexplained faults to other pilots on a rapid worldwide basis, through, I don't know, Facebook or notice boards, etc.?
Not that I'm aware of. Obviously, there is a recommended procedure, which is first off, use the tech log. Second off, file an air safety report and maybe elevate it to an MOR, so it goes directly to the regulator. If you feel you're not being listened to, then all decent airlines or reputable airlines with a decent safety management system should have a confidential reporting procedure where you can escalate your concerns. You can even escalate directly to the regulator if you wish. But no, I guess the closest thing to a worldwide network is probably something like Prune. But the trouble is you don't know who's commentating on there. And at the end of the day, it's just a talking shop. And what could be done? really, if you've got a genuine safety concern, you need to elevate it through or escalate it, sorry, through the correct channels.
Okay, thank you. I think we're sort of getting to the time where I'm just looking through, there's 2 or 3 questions left which I can probably combine because they're all on the same subject really, which is to do with, how trusted this aircraft now is. So where are we? I'm just seeing if I can find. Yeah, so there's one from TX who says that some have said when the MAX finally returns to the skies, it will be the safest plane since it would have been scrutinized thoroughly besides the MCAS. And he says, what do you think of that? On a similar line, Wayland says, do you feel confident that the 737 MAX is now fully safe to fly again? And 2 or 3 others who basically are asking the same question, which is, due to everything that's happened and with the 2 accidents that you described, does the MAX need to be rebranded, or even basically to what extent have both operators and passengers lost trust in this aircraft?
Okay, so yeah, as you say, there's a number of similar questions in there. The first one is about the safety of the new MAX, and it's a question I'm frequently asked is would I fly it? Do I think it's safe? Yes, I do, for the reason your first questioner said, which is it is without doubt the most scrutinized airliner there has ever been. 20 to 22 months grounded with the eyes of the world on it. Yeah, it's as safe as any airliner could be now. I have no doubt about that, and I would fly it. I would take my wife, my family, my friends on it and fly them anywhere on it. I have no doubt as to the present safety standards of the MAX. The second part of the question, sorry, remind me of that again.
It was about
rebranding, wasn't it?
Yes. Do you think Boeing would need to rebrand, basically?
We've seen evidence of that happening. Ryanair, for one, and many other airlines are slowly dropping the name MAX. And I think I almost hate to say this, but I think it was Donald Trump actually first came up with the idea of rebranding it a couple of years ago. There's not much I agree with him on, but that was probably one of his better ideas. I don't think Boeing will rebrand it. I think they will leave that as a call for the individual airlines and operators, and I think that they will listen to their customers. We know from the past that rebranding often works. I mean, look at places like Windscale, if you want to cast your minds back that far, versus the new look Sellafield. So rebranding can work, but really at the end of the day, the only thing which is going to convince people that the MAX is safe, whether you call it the MAX or the 737-8, the only thing that will make people believe it's safe is time and a lack of further accidents. It's sadly going to be true that anything that happens to the MAX from here on in, no matter how innocuous, how commonplace, how almost routine any kind of non-normal event is in that aircraft, the world's press will jump on it and say, oh, look, the MAX has had this, that, or the other, even if it's nothing to do with MCAS, even if other airliners are having that sort of incident, on a weekly basis, because it'll be the MAX, everybody will be focusing on it. But that will die away. That will gradually disappear with time. And when the MAX has proven itself over the forthcoming years to be the safe and efficient airliner that it should have been, and that it will be, I've no doubt, then, you know, this will all become a distant memory.
Thank you indeed. So I think it's probably time to bring that to a close. It's difficult to know what to say, really. I mean, it's an extraordinary. I think we've had over 380 attendees that were listening in to this lecture this evening, and it was a truly extraordinary and a very sobering reminder, I guess, of why our industry is highly regulated. And as you said in the last slide, and probably the most compelling case study that we could ever have in terms of some of these tensions that exist in the industry between time, cost, and development and safety. An amazing lecture, and one which, on behalf of all of those that have listened this evening, thank you so much for that, Chris. It's much appreciated, and we're very grateful for your time and for the clarity of the delivery. Thank you.
No problem. My pleasure.